last week I pointed out three primary reasons as to why I believe there's so much misunderstanding around the topic of the fear of the Lord. The first one, again, is a lack of teaching. When there's a lack of biblical teaching on spiritual realities, mankind begins to attach human opinion, perspective, and preference to the topics. All right? So, and why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? If there's a lack of teaching and definition on it. And the result becomes confusion. And humans have different opinions, perspectives, and preferences. And so they all get thrown out there. Well, I think the fear of the Lord is this. I think the fear of the Lord is this. Well, I think it means this. And now we're all confused. What does the Word say? So there's a lack of teaching on it. And if you'll remember, I said the reason oftentimes there's a lack of teaching is one of two reasons. And this is solely on spiritual leaders. All right? It's either they don't understand the topic themselves, they haven't taken the time to understand it, or they just aren't there yet in their learning curve, or they're afraid it's going to offend their hearers. And that's a lot of times why things don't get taught. There's a lot of things, not just in what we would call the Tanakh, okay, which is what we commonly refer to as the Old Testament scriptures, but it's the Tanakh. But the New Covenant scriptures, there's a lot of things in there that many preachers won't touch, afraid of offending their audience. Okay, so there's a lack of teaching. Number two, again, we're recapping some of the reasons why there's so much misunderstanding around the fear of the Lord. It contains the word fear. In our modern vocabulary, fear is only thought of as a negative emotion, and that promotes avoidance of something. So in people's mind, the fear of the Lord, I got to be afraid of him. I got to trepidate when I'm around him or come to him. And that's going to cause avoidance. And we'll get into what that looked like at Mount Sinai in some later teachings that we do on the fear of the Lord. But it's really interesting because the Lord did not want to scare them away. He wanted them to come near so that they would fear and sin not, is what it says. But rather they feared and they ran away. So there's two different things going on with fear. And we'll get into that. But again, people get confused or they misunderstand because it contains this word fear. But the simple reality is that whatever or whoever we fear is our master. You got to think about that. If you fear something, you're obeying it. You're obeying it. Whether it's, okay, well, I'm afraid of going on an airplane. So in obedience, you don't get on airplanes. You see how that works? So whatever or whomever we fear is our master, and that's who we obey, and that's who will dictate our steps. Now, this can be a blessing if our fear is in the right person. So if we fear him, that's God, who can make our ways prosperous if we walk in his ways, if he dictates our steps, that's a blessing, but it can also be a curse, because if we fear something other than God, we make it our master above God, we walk in its ways, we're going to reap the fruit of those ways, and that's going to bring a curse. Fear of man is probably top of the list in this kind of thinking. I would say most of the time, fear of man would be the thing that would knock us off of fearing God, okay? Because it's man's word versus God's word. And listen, it's going to cost you something. The fear of the Lord will cost you something. It costs all of us something. Okay, third reason is we live and we're raised in a democracy. Now again, this is something that I don't think we think about, but the fear of the Lord is a phrase that is meant to be understood in the context of a kingdom. What is a kingdom? All right? Well, look at the word. You have a king, and then dom, which is dominion. So there's a dominion, an area that is ruled by a king, sovereign. And there's really no true kingdoms on earth today. So again, we don't really understand this. We get to go to the polls and vote for our leaders. Not so in a kingdom. None of us is voting Yeshua into ruling and reigning the planet. It is his and his alone. We get to decide. We can decide if we want to be a part of it or not, but we don't vote him in. And there's not a Congress either that he's consulting with, all right? So there's really no true kingdoms on earth today except maybe like in the Arabian Peninsula. And that's kind of why they're to themselves. I mean, it's a very different way of life. But this is also known as an absolute monarchy. And basically, in a true kingdom, an absolute monarchy, the ruler of that kingdom has absolute sovereign rule. And the fear of the Lord, you can take the capital L off of Lord and just make a little case, lowercase l. And that was a title for human rulers as well, was Lord. And they would talk about the fear of the Lord, even of human rulers. Okay? So, a king, a ruler, in an absolute monarch has absolute sovereign rule. And what the sovereign says is the law of the land. And you know something? If you're in a situation like that, the outcome of your life depends on honoring the king's word. The sovereign leader holds the power and authority over all the lives of the citizens under his rule. A king in an absolute monarch, in history past, a king could, for any arbitrary reason, say, put that person to death or not. He had the power to give them life or to bring death. But also the sovereign leader had the responsibility to care for the citizens of his kingdom. If his citizens were not doing well, it was all on him. Think about Pharaoh. I mean, he would have been one of these guys. You know, he took great care of trying to understand how to take care of his citizens, and that's why he hired Joseph to do what he did, in preserving the land from famine. So, to fear the Lord and honor the king typically would bring great favor and blessing from the king. But to fear the Lord, capital L, would have also meant that to those under sovereign rulers, they should always fear God and obey him over earthly kings. So again, I'm saying all this to say, the fear of the Lord is a kingdom phrase understood in the context of a kingdom. If you try to understand what the fear of the Lord is in the context of a democracy or any other type of government, you're not going to understand it. It's a governmental term, if you will. It is how we relate to God in his government, that his ways and his word is higher than anything else.